Not sure for the slide deck. Oh, he's getting working. Okay, great. There it comes. Good morning, and as the other speakers were saying, thanks for coming out in the middle of all this rain, but at least it's not 10 degrees out, so we can all be happy about that. My name is Kevin Wilcuts, and I'm with the U.S. Department of Labor's Bureau of International Labor Affairs, and I help direct the Office of Child Labor, Forced Labor, and Human Trafficking. And it's a real pleasure to be here. And I want to say first, just listening to Stefan and Nikki speak, it speaks to what one of our hopes is at the Department of Labor, is that we can work with companies like yours who care about these issues. In order for us to make progress, we need to bring a sort of all-hands-on-deck approach. And I think, as Nikki was talking about the training that they engaged with UPS, that's really heartening to hear. And one of the things that my colleague Rachel Reba and myself will be speaking about today is some of the work we're doing, but we're hoping that work, you can get to know a little bit about it. We left some material out there, we have 25 years that we've been in office working on these issues. But we hope you can understand more about what we're doing, and that some of the tools that we have can be useful to you. So that's really our hope here today. iLab sees our work as ensuring that there's a global playing field that is fair around the world. And that's important for workers in other countries, but it's also important for workers here in the United States, because workers in the United States shouldn't have to compete against governments that don't uphold fair labor practices. We promote fair global playing by enforcing trade commitments, strengthening labor standards, and the focus of the work of my office, which is addressing child labor, forced labor, and human trafficking. And again, very happy to be here with the focus today on trafficking. As was mentioned earlier, unscrupulous employers who exploit workers or governments that fail to act to end abusive labor practices, they unfairly undermine the competitiveness of law-abiding businesses and the services they produce for global markets. We can all agree that trade should not involve or be built upon the labor of children, shouldn't be based on child labor or slave labor. iLab's research, policy, and our trade and labor monitoring enforcement and our technical assistance is all committed to trying to help address the situation and address labor abuses. iLab negotiates, monitors, and enforces the labor provisions of trade agreements and trade preference programs. We do this in part to ensure that trade partners do not decrease workers' protections in order to gain, again, that unfair trade advantage or to attract investment because they're not upholding their laws. We bolster these efforts with targeted technical assistance and cooperation to strengthen compliance with the labor requirements of U.S. trade agreements and preference programs. We also actively work with U.S. Department of State and U.S. Trade Representative offices, as well as businesses and workers, to improve labor conditions in key trading partner countries. But today, we'd really like to focus, Rachel and myself, on the work we do that's addressing child labor, forced labor, and human trafficking. iLab helps raise awareness about these issues, in part through our 3 flagship reports. In September of 2018, we released the 17th edition of our findings on the worst forms of child labor, and the 8th edition of our list of goods produced by child labor and forced labor, as well as updates to 2 apps that we have. One is known as Sweat and Toil, and the other is Comply Chain. These reports highlight sectors where abuses persist around the world, and they describe the progress that countries are making to uphold their commitments to address child labor issues. We use this research not just so that it will sit on the shelf, but that so we can go out and we can meet with and talk with government counterparts and talk about what they need to do to address these issues. And Rachel will speak more to what's in our reports, how we lay out the issues, but also how we look to make these actionable. And we hope that as you get to know our reports, that you'll see how they can also be of use to you in the work you do. So with that, let me turn over to Rachel so she can tell you a little bit more. Thank you.
So Kevin mentioned that in September we released 2 updates to our reports. And the first report is the findings on the worst forms of child labor. And it's not just various types of child labor, this also includes child trafficking, which is what is germane to our discussion today. And so this year's report covered 132 countries and territories that are the beneficiaries of US trade preference programs. So it's not comprehensive to the whole world, but to countries who are under the generalized system of preferences. And within the report, each country receives a grade or a ranking based not on the size of its problem, but based on its efforts to address the problem in 5 key areas of laws, of law enforcement, of policies, of social programs, and of coordination among government and other actors. And so a country can receive a significant advancement, which is the highest and the best ranking, down to a no advancement, which is the lowest of the rankings. This just shows you countries around the world and some of the rankings they received. But we don't just want to point out problems in countries or gaps in countries. We also want to provide strategies to help governments who are interested in addressing this problem move forward. And so after we're done assessing countries' efforts and describing them in great detail, as well as describing the problem in the country, we then lay out for each country a set of suggested actions specific to that country and the gaps that we were able to diagnose. And in the 2018 report, there were over 1,700 country-specific suggested actions that we recommended for countries who wanted to move forward on these issues. And you will see from this slide that 63% of them, so a really high percentage, related to the need of countries to either strengthen their laws that they have on the books currently, or to better enforce their laws. So a significant amount of the gaps around the world are really related to lack of law enforcement. And what we have observed, and those of you who have multinational enterprises have probably observed as well, is that around the world, workplace inspection systems remain relatively weak across the board because of capacity issues, low resources, inadequate budgets, lack of fuel, lack of transport, lack of training for staff. For example, only 24% of the countries that were listed in the report this year, so out of 132, have adequately staffed labor inspectorates. And so if only a quarter of the world has enough labor inspectors, according to the ILO, to conduct inspections of workplaces, you can see that a lot of inspections are not being done. Law enforcement around the world is also really hindered by corruption, inefficient legal mandates, poor data collection, and lack of coordination. Our most recent report revealed for the first time that more than half of all labor inspectorates do not even have the authority to assess any sort of violation against problems that they find when they do workplace inspections. So they are merely observers who note that things are happening but are unable to do anything about them. So what does this mean for the business community? What it really means around the world is that if 76% of countries don't have adequate resources to monitor workplaces, and more than half of inspectorates are not authorized to assess penalties when they do find them, it's really then incumbent on the business community with, in many places, not that much support from governments to see what is happening in supply chains and to really remediate issues when they are found. And so we are using the 1,700 suggested actions that I noted to really work with governments around the world to help them strengthen not just their labor law enforcement systems, but also their criminal law enforcement systems. The other report that we released this year is the list of goods made by child labor or forced labor, which can include adult forced labor, and this also would cover various types of human trafficking that we see around the world. And this is one of the key tools that we use for engaging with governments on a regular basis. And this year's report, we added 10 new goods, and you can see them here, that have never before been included in this list. We also added one new country, which is Eswatini, formerly known as Swaziland, if you're not familiar with their name change. And we added goods from the countries that are listed up there who have previously been on the list. We also this year, and I'll mention that now there are 148 goods on the list from 76 countries. Also, for the first time on this list, we added a good that's been produced exclusively by North Korean forced laborers. We know that North Korean forced laborers are sent by their government around the world, and their government collects remittances. But this year, we have timber from Russia that has been put on the list for the first time. So this is just showing you the most prevalent sectors, the most, where we're kind of seeing new goods added, et cetera. But we don't just want to add goods to the list. Yes, often what the press covers is the things that we're adding, but this year we also removed 4 goods from the list because problems in those sectors were seen to be occurring in no more than an isolated incident. And this year, this was physic nuts from Burma, sugarcane from Panama, cotton from Paraguay, and cotton from Uzbekistan. But as you know, ultimately, lists can only be as good as the information that we have. And this is to say, when you're looking at the list, and if you're conducting business in these countries, many businesses look at the list to see where risk may be occurring within their supply chain, just because of the nature of what's going on in the country. But it is likely that there are goods that should be on this list that are not on this list as yet due to lack of information. And so often what we see is the countries that are on this list, and you'll see that some of them, such as Paraguay, Brazil, and Vietnam, have many goods on the list. And this is not because the problem is worse in those countries necessarily. This is really because these governments have taken the really important step to not only research the problem in their country and conduct national labor surveys, but also to release publicly the results of the research. And these governments are then to be commended. Rather than thinking the problem is so terrible there and worse than somewhere else, we want to really commend these governments for being transparent in the work that they are doing. And so in your interactions with them, if you are meeting with governments who have a lot of goods on this list, please thank them for the work that they are doing to find the issues, to highlight the issues, and then to address the issues. Kevin mentioned that we have 2 mobile smartphone applications. Both of them are available on the Google and Apple app stores for free download. And the first one is our Sweat and Toil app. And so what this app does is takes the 2 reports that I just mentioned, so almost 2,000 pages of research were you to look at our reports online, which you absolutely can, and puts them condensed into one app. So once you download the app, you can then use it anywhere in the world without any kind of internet connection, which is really useful if you're working in developing countries without stable internet. But you can really quickly go into this app. You can look for a country you're interested in, you can look for a specific good you're interested in, and you can see where risks might be in supply chains. Our other app is called Comply Chain, and you will find a flyer about this app in the middle of your tables. And DOL developed this app to assist businesses around the world in identifying and remediating abuses in their supply chains. And so some businesses are really far along in their work on supply chains, some are just starting out. And this tool is really good for businesses and their suppliers, especially, their 2nd and 3rd tier suppliers that are just starting out. We released this app for the first time in 2007, and then because of feedback that we received from the business community about how useful the app was and how it would be useful to their lower level suppliers in foreign countries, we released an update to this app in September in French and Spanish. And we are working on, for this coming year, potentially at least one additional language. So we will continue to develop this, but this app is really a place that you can go to get some basic training, very basic resources, and little vignettes about companies that have done amazing work in this area to really help suppliers get started in looking into abuses in their supply chains.
Thanks, Rachel. So as Rachel was saying, these tools that we have developed in this research, we hope it's important to you in terms of informing the work you do. We also use it to inform the work that we do in countries. We have worked in 97 countries in terms of technical assistance. We have funded 332 projects. We've worked with 85 organizations. Many of these are the organizations you would think about when you think about groups that have worked with children, but who also have worked on issues like forced labor and trafficking. We currently oversee an active portfolio of projects that's worth about $275 million. These projects are working on the ground with NGOs. They're working with governments, trying to help them address some of the gaps that Rachel was speaking about, particularly in the area of laws, when laws are not up to international standards, providing training, also working to improve enforcement. In the area of child labor, trying to help children access schooling, working with families so they are not dependent on the labor of their children and they're not as vulnerable to trafficking. We funded this past year 6 new projects, and I want to mention a couple of them. One of them was a $7.5 million project with Windrock International. This one was specifically focused on strengthening laws, improving law enforcement, and improving coordination among different law enforcement agencies. We know here in the United States that's what makes us more effective on addressing things like trafficking. We want to share that experience around the world. This project will also focus on Thailand and Paraguay, and we'll be adding countries as the project moves on where we see a need. We also awarded a project to Partners of the America to improve conditions of work and to reduce child labor and forced labor in palm oil supply chains. This project will be focused on Colombia and Ecuador. With all of these projects, we hope that we can pilot efforts that are effective, that address gaps, but our real goal is we want people in the country to take ownership for these efforts, to replicate good practices, and to scale them up. And we look for all of this to tie into the engagement we do with our programming, with our research. So in all of these ways, and with the tools, the applications which we produce, we want to make sure that you're aware of these. Please continue to give us feedback. Let us know how we can be of help. As I said before, we're really happy to be here, and we want to partner with you. We want to find ways that we can be more effective and leverage your expertise and that we can lend ours. So again, thank you very much.
Okay, good, that's on. I want to thank both Kevin and Rachel for their remarks and for being here today. Just a couple of questions to expand upon that a little bit to talk about some of the work iLab is doing. As you've heard today, a big theme of this event is partnerships between government, NGOs, and in particular employers. So I wanted to ask you to expand just a little bit on how you work with the private sector, how companies here that may not be engaged with you already, how can they get more involved with iLab's work?
That's great. No, thank you very much. And I want to mention that we've had a long history of working with the private sector, and it really covers a number of important sectors that are important to the U.S. economy. We've worked for about 18 years on issues related to child labor and cocoa production. And we have worked with some of the biggest companies in the U.S. and in the world on these issues. These are the companies that produce chocolate, but also the ones that are involved in processing cocoa. In Madagascar, we're working in the area of vanilla production. And that's been really important, and the participation of governments with business has really been instrumental there. In Rwanda, we're working on tea, and Rwanda they were hoping to be the first country that could say that they had a tea sector completely free of child labor. And this is the kind of thing we want to tell a government that wants to step up and make that commitment. We want to provide them the support so they know what it will take, and they have the practices that they need to work on and scale up. I also want to mention a project that we're funding this year, which is in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Looking at an issue I think that we're all looking at right now is with our smartphones, and as we look at more cars that are running on electricity, we know that we need cobalt as a key input. That's something that we have seen more companies looking to how can they find ways to ensure that the cobalt that we all need for these items that we use every day and that are so integral to our lives, but how can we make sure that that doesn't involve child labor? So we're working right now with companies, and we're hoping to work with companies, with the civil society, with government to address that situation.
Rachel, anything you want to add to that? Or okay. You kind of hit on something important there, which with the cobalt issue, which is the supply chain, right? Mm-hmm. So a lot of the firms in this room and business generally are very concerned about how they can ensure that their supply chain does not involve trafficking or child labor. So are there things that you do specifically to help companies understand how to map out their supply chain, how to look at their supply chain for any trafficking issues?
Do you want to start?
Sure. So one of the things that we really are focusing on is, as I mentioned earlier, our comply chain, smartphone application. And it's also, you don't just have to look at it in your tiny smartphone or your tablet. You can also find the entire app online as well in larger view. But the really cool thing about this app is that it has embedded within it links to many resources, not just Department of Labor resources, but resources from a variety of companies, from a variety of cross-sector initiatives, from trade organizations, et cetera, that we have been engaging with, working with, partnering with. So we've tried to put the best that is available right now in one place for organizations to use. We also, as Kevin mentioned, are engaging very actively with businesses that want more engagement with us. And so to that extent, there are members of our team who are regularly doing webinars, who are doing various sorts of training for the business community. I'll also mention, too, some of our other government colleagues were not able to be here today because of the shutdown. But this morning, the Department of Labor, or not Department of Labor, the Department of State sent me some points as well about one of their tools, which normally I don't read off of a phone during a presentation, but I will share with you. The Office to Monitor and Combat Trafficking in Persons, known as JTIP, they have a tool called the Responsible Sourcing Tool that they put together with an NGO called Eradicate. And this is an online tool. You can easily access it at www.responsiblesourcingtool.org. And what I want to mention to you about the tool, which is very in-depth and covers many sectors, 43 different commodities, but the good things that it also has in it that may be helpful are they have a variety of comprehensive risk management tools that organizations can go and engage with and look into. But what they specifically have is a tool with criteria for screening and evaluating labor recruiters, which is helpful for organizations that are using foreign workers, either here in the US, if you're bringing workers into the US, or if you're working overseas and bringing foreign workers from other countries there. A tool for monitoring the performance of labor recruiters, sample supplier and subcontractor self-assessment, a tool on conducting migrant worker interviews, which is a really important thing to be looking at, and sample compliance plans. And they are regularly updating this website and this tool, and they are going to be adding a whole new component on the food and beverage industry. I guess soon. They don't say exactly when that is expected to be released, but soon. And so that's something you can continue to check back in if you're not already engaging with JTIP or Verite individually to look at some of their resources.
Great. The International Labor Affairs Bureau, by definition, tends to work in international issues, as you might guess. But are there things that you're also doing domestically to help employers understand the trafficking issue?
Yes, our various DOL agencies, so as you know, ILAB is a small international bureau embedded in a very large domestic agency. And so our large domestic agency has bureaus and divisions and other agencies that are working on a variety of different things. And so the prime agencies that are working to combat human trafficking here in the US are the Wage and Hour Division, where our Labor Inspectorate sits, the Employment and Training Administration, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, and the Office of the Inspector General. And these entities are each doing different things, but for instance, the Wage and Hour Division is continuing to inspect workplaces throughout the US and noting violations, and when they note suspected human trafficking violations, their role is to turn those cases over to Department of Justice, FBI, local level criminal law enforcement, depending on the situation and the jurisdiction. Wage and Hour is also responsible when human trafficking cases are moving through the court systems for conducting the back pay that human trafficking victims are owed. So they do all of the calculations for that, which are then introduced into this court of law. They also calculate restitution, which is owed for victims. So it's a really important part of the legal process in this country that DOL, from a labor perspective, is feeding into. Our inspectors and our colleagues from the Employment and Training Administration are also involved in local city-level task forces throughout the country, the human trafficking task forces, as well as the Department of Justice's ACT teams, which are pilot programs throughout the country to address human trafficking. ETA is also right now really looking into human trafficking in agriculture in the US, which is a significant problem that we do have in our country. And so they are doing webinars for the state workforce agencies so that the states can better be inspecting and addressing these issues. So these are some of the things that we are doing. Office of Inspector General continues to pursue cases related to human trafficking, which we don't have much information to share publicly about, but they are actively moving forward with litigation issues.
Okay. Last question for you all before I let you go. You talked a lot about the apps that you developed, and those are pretty interesting. I didn't even know those were there, so I appreciate
So you can
you
download
bringing that
them.
to our attention. Yeah. So as you move forward with kind of the next generation of those, are there ways that companies here, the Chamber, can engage with you to help refine those tools and make them perhaps more effective?
Absolutely. We are eager for your input. We crave as much input as we can get, in fact. So if you have input about foreign languages that would be useful for you to have Comply Chain translated into, we have not decided on the language for this year as yet, so we would be interested in that input. If you know of resources that would be helpful to the business community that we have not included in Comply Chain, we would love for you to point us in that direction. If you see things in any of our apps that are confusing, that are incorrect, that could be better elaborated upon, you know, if in the steps in Comply Chain we've missed something that you think is glaringly obvious, please come tell us, email us, call us, come meet with us. We will come meet with you because we really are wanting our apps to be as useful as possible to the work that companies are grappling with, because these are really difficult issues, and we want to help especially the companies that are just at the cusp of starting to think about and work on these issues, really take hold of them, and learn from the lessons that a lot of you have had to go through for the past couple of decades in trying to figure this out from scratch.
And if I could just add, when we came out with these apps, this was a big thing for us to do going into, for government to be going into that space. And we found with our Sweat and Toil app that it's been a wonderful tool that we can provide to businesses, to governments. It's very easy to work with. A lot of companies are using it as part of their risk assessment, which we're really happy to hear about. And like Rachel was saying, we welcome feedback. But we're also looking, technology keeps changing. So also, if you know of something, if you're looking at, particularly our supply chain, we're looking at that right now and saying, is this the best way to present the information? So if you also have an idea of Department of Labor, could you change the way you're showing that, or add this or add that? Let us know. We really benefit from your ideas, and a lot of you are on the cutting edge of the use of some of these technologies, and we could use the help, so we appreciate it.
So is there a formal process to weigh in? Is there a Federal Register process, or people just reach out to you directly? What's the best way for people to get engaged on that?
You can reach out to us directly. You could email us. We have a Global Kids email that can go to anyone, but you can just reach out to our offices, and we welcome the feedback. There's no need for any formal process to let us know what you like and what you don't like. We'll just take whatever information and suggestions you have.
Great. Okay, well, thank you. Appreciate
you very
you
much.
being here today.